Good morning, and thank you. An important segment of our time is involved in information transfer, spent in teaching conferences, and yet surprisingly, little attention is focused on how to optimize this valuable avenue of learning. I'd like to suggest a few basic rules. The first rule is too obvious. Nevertheless, it's even more embarrassing to see how frequently this rule is violated. The rule is never give away the answer. The rule refers to how a subject is introduced. Many moderators will say, now, let's consider a case of eosinophilic granuloma. From the educational point of view, that is a disaster. Each case should create some anticipation, some excitement, and perhaps a little apprehension. In contrast, when it's explained that this is an eosinophilic granuloma, the air goes out of the balloon. Everyone now knows the answer, and thinking stops. The second rule is titrate the questions to the level of the individual student. If the students range in a conference from medical students to fellows, the knowledge base, the thought processes, and the experience varies widely. Importantly, the teaching should involve a certain amount of discomfort for the student. It is essential to probe and test. In my view, the optimum teaching method is the Socratic approach, specifically turning one question after another back to the student. However, it's essential that you frame your questions to a reasonable level relative to the student's knowledge and experience. The third rule, strangely enough, is it's not necessary to know the answer. If you ask a student a question that he or she already knows, no teaching has taken place. The best teaching involves a slightly more difficult level than the student already knows. However, it's important to allow the student to gain from this challenge rather than being embarrassed by it. And I will commonly say to students, you do not have to know the answer. You do not have to be right, but there are two things you must do. You must try, and you must think. The fourth is to probe. We must probe beyond the rote information into the source of that information, the quality of the information, and alternate information. The second region for probing is the thought process behind the response. And that leads the teacher to say, why do you say that? Or how strongly can you support that? And the third area of probing is in the decision-making process itself. How did you decide that? What led to that decision? The fifth principle is to teach data gathering. Many decisions are relatively simple by gathering more or better data. Therefore, learning how to gather data, how to identify deficiencies in the data, and what to do when the data are in conflict becomes important. Let me use X-ray as an example. There are only two ways to make a mistake in reading an X-ray. The first is not seeing what is there, and the second is not understanding what you see. Consider periosteal new bone formation. If you don't identify the periosteal new bone formation, you are likely to make a mistake. But if you don't interpret the periosteal new bone formation correctly, you also will likely make a mistake. By teaching this particular sequence, the student, in fact, can learn to teach himself. When the data are deficient, the best answer is often overlooked. The best answer is to get more or better data. Often overlooked in getting more or better data is to let some time go by. The problem may become far more apparent with the passage of time. The third phase of data gathering is what to do when the data conflict. Obviously, the first simple step is to repeat the data. Perhaps it was a lab error, or perhaps the data have changed since the last data set were gathered. Commonly, a more sophisticated technique such as CT, MR, or PET scan will help. But it is surprising how often the failure to make the right decision hinges on the failure to recognize that the data were incomplete or inaccurate. And sixth, to me, the most intriguing aspect of all is this: what are you going to do when you don't know what to do? While this is a conceptual process in the conference room, it loses its conceptual aspect in the operating room. What are you going to do when you don't know what to do? If you knew the answer, it wouldn't be a quandary. And here you must exercise the totality of your experience, your equanimity, your ability to critically reassess the data, evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses of a wide range of possibilities, and then force yourself to elect a specific plan and execute that plan in the absence of the information that reassures you that it will work. In the teaching conference, it is possible to practice this sharp dilemma. In summary, teaching conferences are an enormously intriguing exercise in the modification of human behavior. They underlie best medical practices, they are essential in the training of surgical responsibility, and, if well done, are both challenging and fun. Enjoy these tips.